So it is a Friday, and we do something very special here at Fox Weather. We're heavily committed to those that serve our country. I grew up as a military child. My husband served in the armed forces as well. And we want to take a moment to honor America's heroes. This is sponsored by Tunnel to Towers. Fox Weather's opportunity to highlight first responders and armed forces that really step up to the plate, especially during times of extreme weather. And this week is very special. We are honoring a first responder who helped during Hurricane Helene when it hit western North Carolina. James White, welcome to Fox Weather. You are a firefighter, EMT, technical rescue worker, and you are with the Hurricane Fire and Rescue. Forgive me if I pronounced it wrong. You'll have to forgive me. But welcome to Fox Weather Command.
Thank you very much for having me, and that's okay. Not a lot of people have heard of Girton.
Well, you know what? More should. I was just listening to an interview that you had done on YouTube up in my office before coming down and getting on set. And what really remarked me was your personal experience during Helene. Your home was impacted. You were with your wife and your children when Helene was bearing down on western North Carolina. I'm sure it's difficult and hard to go back to those times, but can you tell us a little bit about what it truly felt when that storm was coming right over the mountain?
It was surprisingly intimidating. We were in the weather briefings leading up to this storm. We knew that it was going to be serious, but we had no idea what was actually coming our way. Had we known, I think we would have done some things a little differently. I would have evacuated my own family for one. But I spent a lot of time outdoors in the mountains, kind of all over the world. I've experienced some pretty extreme weather, but I did get pretty nervous when the wind gusts got up to 80 or so miles an hour, hitting the house directly. We took a tree to the roof very early in the morning, and I took my family down to the basement and boarded it up from the inside. And it was just kind of like, well, I know the house isn't going to hold up for, too much longer, but I think we're okay for now. And luckily we made it through. But it did get, a little scary. My 6-year-old was definitely very scared. But we're really grateful that we made it through safe.
Yeah, and, I think a lot of people that were not involved in this disaster, they think about the water, the flood. But I mean, gosh, you guys had 90 to 100 mile per hour winds. And it's a true-on hurricane locked up in the mountains, which is a terrifying scenario. You mentioned the fact that you've seen some pretty wild weather. And going into Helene, there was a strong forecast, a lot of aggressive verbiage about how this was going to be something that the area had never seen before. There were some comparisons to the Great Flood of 1916. But, I mean, that was over 100 years prior to this event. So in some ways, it's almost like you're having to prepare for something that's not imaginable in your mind. So post-event, how would you want to really warn Americans? Like, how are you even able to be prepared for something that you can't imagine?
Well, I think that this was a really good lesson for us to learn as first responders, but also as citizens. We came together as a community to recover from this storm, especially here in Girton. This wasn't an effort just by first responders. This was a community effort. But I think one thing that everybody learned was preparedness is important. There's been a movement for a while in the preparedness community of make sure that you can self-rescue. And I think that became very evident to people is look, we are going to do everything we can to get to you, and we're going to do everything we can to help you. But there are some conditions that we can't operate in because, we're humans too. And in those instances, there are some things that you can do as a normal everyday person to be prepared and to make yourself safer and more likely to survive an extreme weather event.
Well, and I think as Americans, we're blessed with the reality that most of our lives we walk around assuming that we're going to be taken care of. And unfortunately, with the storms that we have seen over the last decade and a half, there are a lot of scenarios that happen now where you do have to take that ownership and that decision and that planning to make sure that you and your family are safe. I do want to sort of pivot and talk about the recovery efforts. Obviously, we're months out here, and post-tragedy and post-disaster, everybody shows up. All of a sudden, you have warehouses full of stuff. You got lots of stuff. It's almost overwhelming to sort of disseminate that out to the local community. But eventually, 6 months later, fewer people show up. It's the same faces that are committed, but fewer people are showing up new to sort of bolster help. What does North Carolina still need as you move forward in the next 6 months to the next year?
So, we're in a rebuilding process now. There are a lot of organizations here that are putting forth a great effort doing that, a lot of nonprofits. The big thing, though, I also work for a nonprofit called Savage Freedoms Relief Operations. And what we've seen is that the donations, excuse me, are really drying up at this point. People kind of think that it's over, like, oh, they're fine now. And a lot of places you go, that might be true, but there's a lot of places that are still honestly devastated. We're rebuilding homes for people. We're having, my own home isn't fixed yet, this many months later. It's going to be a long-term ongoing effort. And, the state's doing their part, fixing the roads and the infrastructure, but they don't do that for private homeowners, and there's a lot of people whose insurance claims were denied, myself included. So, they don't have help and assistance in rebuilding unless they go to one of these nonprofit organizations and basically seek help that way. But a lot of that funding is starting to dry up. It's not fresh on people's minds. We've had a couple, we've had the fires in California. We've had a hurricane in Florida. We've had some things that have diverted attention other places. And that's kind of, had a negative impact on our recovery effort here. So the biggest thing is getting funding out to the people who need it. And I mean funding where it's like, hey, look, here's funding that you can use for whatever you need to use it for.
Yeah,
you can re-drywall a room, whatever it is you need.
I think a lot of people underestimate the cost of rebuilding, but also what is left up to the homeowner and the family to figure out. I mean, landslides, those are not covered by most insurance policies. If the whole side of a mountain takes out your house, which happened to many people in Western North Carolina, there's no insurance policy that's written up for that, and so the entire cost of your home is on you. So, here at Fox Weather, we're so committed to keeping your stories alive. And I appreciate you taking the time to sort of put yourself back into that moment and open up your heart, because that's how we get more help to Western North Carolina, is by, sharing the stories of everybody that's still living the reality. Because unfortunately, for, folks that didn't live through this disaster, they do move on. It's the nature of being a human being. And so we need to make sure that we create these opportunities to let people know that the need is still there. So if anybody's watching that has, the ability to bolster some funds and, get some hard work out there that can rebuild some driveways, stuff like that I'm sure that would be extremely helpful.
We appreciate that. And we have a GoFundMe here at the Girton Fire Department that you can find relatively easily. And all that money goes directly back into the community.
And James, before we let you go, can you please tell us the information on your nonprofit one more time?
The nonprofit is Savage Freedoms Relief Operations. You can find us. We have a website that's easy to find. And then we have, our GoFundMe here at the Girton Fire Department that would directly impact the community of Girton.
Awesome. Well, it was such a pleasure having this conversation with you, James. We send you our best. I promise you, us here at Fox Weather, we're not going to forget Western North Carolina, and we will continue to do our best to help you move forward.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Take care.